Since taking the helm of the FBI, Director Christopher Wray has avoided the harsh spotlight and headlines of his predecessor, James Comey, who was fired by President Trump. And a year into the job, Christopher Wray's most important task is to help restore the reputation of America's top federal law enforcement agency. We spoke to the FBI's new boss for an exclusive, wide-ranging interview over 2 days in September. He told us he's working to rebuild trust after harsh attacks on the Bureau's integrity from our nation's commander-in-chief. The president has said that he wants the attorney general to investigate who wrote that anonymous New York Times op-ed. Do you believe, as the president does, that this is an issue of national security?
Well, first off, I can tell you I didn't write it. I didn't have anything to do with it. Second, I would tell you that we're not really in the practice of confirming or discussing whether we're going to be conducting a particular investigation. I would tell you that we're going to make decisions about that kind of thing based on all the factors we normally do, which is whether or not we have sufficient evidence of federal crime.
You've said you did not write the
Right.
New York Times op-ed. I know that you have denied that, but I want to ask you about the content. It described the president's leadership style as, quote, impetuous, adversarial, petty, and ineffective. It said that the root of the president's problem is his, quote, amorality. Does that sound like the president you know?
I try very hard to make sure that my relationship with the president is a professional one. And beyond that, I'm not going to really be weighing in on opinions, especially anonymously expressed opinions. I can tell you that there are lots of ways for people to express their views and their disagreements. For me, the idea of doing it through an anonymous op-ed is about the furthest thing from my mind.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the appropriate way to do it?
I think that it depends on the circumstances.
And if you had a disagreement with the president, how would you raise it?
Again, depends on the circumstances. I think it starts by having a direct conversation. It depends on what the issue is.
Mm-hmm. You're here, you live in Washington, so you also know that much of this town is also talking about Bob Woodward's book called Fear. And in that book, he describes an administration, which you are part of, but he's specifically describing the White House as having a nervous breakdown of executive power. Have you experienced any of that?
I have not seen a nervous breakdown of executive power. I have also not read Mr. Woodward's book, and I'm not sure whether I'll ever find time.
How would you describe your relationship with President Trump?
My focus is on having a very professional relationship with the president. I think that's what I've been trying to do since day one, and that's true today just as much as it was on day one.
Do you meet with him one-on-one?
No.
You usually meet with the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General?
Well, I certainly have had plenty of meetings with the president. I just haven't met with him one-on-one. I usually meet with him with a small group of other people, and it depends on what the issue is.
He tweets a lot about cabinet members and top members of his administration, but you specifically have never been the subject of one of his tweets.
Well, I'm not much of a Twitter guy, as people will tell you, and that's not meant to criticize Twitter. Social media commentary has its place. I just find that I've got enough to do all day long running the FBI that without getting too hung up and worrying about what's on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Let me turn now to Russia and its malign activities. When Vladimir Putin said that Russia has never interfered and is not going to interfere in American affairs, including the election process, was he lying?
I'm not going to accuse somebody of lying. I'll just say that that doesn't jibe with our read of the evidence, and we're pretty confident in our read.
What is Russia doing to disrupt the midterms that are now just about 60 days away?
So what we're seeing now is a continuation of what we call the malign foreign influence efforts. What they do is sow both inaccurate information, disinformation, it's a kind of information warfare, and then propaganda, exaggerated half-truths, distortions, and they do both in clandestine and covert means. They fan it out through social media and try to pit Americans against each other, and they typically will seize upon some social issue and try to gin up both sides so that we turn on each other. And so
but that's
this
not
is
new. We've known that for several years.
Well, I think what has been happening for a number of years, but it continues to happen relentlessly to this day, and the use of social media is a bullhorn that allows that kind of information warfare to be inflicted much more effectively. So that's why it's something that remains a concern and could influence individual voters if we're not, as Americans, vigilant about who's saying what and where their information is coming from.
As director of the FBI, I know you created this foreign influence task force to try and funnel some of this actionable intelligence on so some changes could be made. How has that changed things? How has that made the election process safer?
Well, the Foreign Influence Task Force is something that we created last year to bring together the different disciplines of the FBI, which is designed to do a number of things. One is to make sure that we ensure that we have the right kinds of investigations throughout all of our field offices, whether it's a counterintelligence investigation, a cyber attack, a criminal investigation, all of which are designed to deal with that. We're also doing a better job of communicating with state and local election officials about information that they should have, working closely with the Department of Homeland Security. And then, of course, we're also working very closely with the private sector, especially the technology sector, in order to help them be more effective and aggressive in protecting their own platforms from abuse.
Mm-hmm. In fact, just in April, Facebook announced that it had dismantled or taken down hundreds of accounts that were tied to the Internet Research Agency, which is essentially a Russian troll farm that is pushing out a lot of this information warfare. When Facebook did that, was that based on the actionable intelligence from the FBI?
Well, I can't discuss in this kind of setting specific intelligence, specific investigations, but what I can tell you is that we have a much, much closer working relationship with the prominent companies in Silicon Valley, where we share information with them, they can take certain steps, and then they share information with us, and we get sort of a back and forth that's very much for the best benefit of the American people.
Why are we letting this happen? Why are we letting Russia do this? We have the greatest law enforcement agency in the world, the FBI. We have the most powerful tech companies in the world. Why are we allowing Russia to do this?
I don't view us as allowing them to do anything. I think we're countering it. We are working hard to counter it more and more effectively all the time.
How are we fighting back?
Well, in some cases, we have law enforcement investigations that lead to charges. In some cases, we have steps that the technology companies can take themselves. And in some cases, we're raising awareness, because the best defense against disinformation and propaganda is accurate information. And the more the American people are careful about what they're hearing and who they're hearing it from, the more protected we are.
Is it a top priority for you?
It absolutely has to be. Our democracy is one of the things that we're most proud of in this country, and rightly so.
Is it a top priority for this White House?
I think it is. I think the fact that you had the FBI director, the director of national intelligence, the secretary of Homeland Security, the head of NSA all together, along with the national security advisor, holding a conference together is a reflection of how seriously we all take this subject.
That was just once in August.
Well, I don't want to measure our efforts by a press conference, but I think that's a reflection of what we're doing. We have lots and lots of meetings behind the scene, and more importantly, at the levels below us, we have lots of people working very hard to protect America.
Clarify that then, because while the FBI has been working and other agencies have been working to counter this election meddling, there are some who have said there is no one driving this bus. There's no one from the White House who's in charge, making sure that the communication is going on. When was the last time that there was a White House meeting on this issue?
I mean, we've had a number of meetings. I don't know that I could think through on my calendar when the last one was, but we've had quite a few over the last several months.
So not a concern for you?
The number of meetings?
Well, that there's coordination within the government on this issue, that it's a top issue.
I will say I've heard that complaint. I think it's a red herring, to be honest. What I find when I talk to our folks, when I talk to my counterparts at Homeland Security or NSA or ODNI, the Director of National Intelligence, or elsewhere in the community, the CIA, et cetera, everyone's focused on it. Everyone knows what their jobs are. Everyone's working hard.
So come November, when the tally is announced of the votes, can Americans be confident that it was a fair election?
I think Americans can have confidence in our election system.
We talked about the intelligence assessment that Russia is trying to weaken and divide the United States. There was a Pew poll out recently about the reputation of the FBI, and it showed a 28-point partisan gap in terms of how the FBI is viewed. 77% of Democrats
were positively supportive of the FBI, 49% of Republicans. Amongst Republicans, that's fallen 16% in just the last year. Why do you think there are some questions about the reputation of the FBI?
Well, I think sometimes watching the news and certainly trolling the internet, you would think that the FBI has only had 2 investigations over the last 3 years. But I will tell you that when you get out into real America, people know differently. I've been to 43 already of our 56 field offices, and we'll get to all 56 in short order. I've met with something like 2,500 of our state, local, and foreign partners. I've met with prosecutors, I've met with victims, I've met with judges. And in office after office, what I encounter from the people who actually experience the FBI through our work is a very different story. And we're not driven by poll numbers. If there's one thing the FBI is not about, it's poll numbers. We're about the work and about the people we work for, and that's the American people, that's the victims that we're trying to protect from, whether it's kidnappings or terrorist attacks or gang violence. That's what we're about.
Do you feel like you have support from the White House for the FBI's mission?
I do. I think we're doing what we need to do. I don't really get too hung up on, and I don't think our folks get too hung up on what's on social media, to be honest. We're much more driven by what do our partners think of us, what do the prosecutors think, what do the judges think, what do the juries think, what do the victims and their families think, what do all our federal, state, local, foreign intelligence community partners think? Do they know they can count on us? And over and over and over again, the feedback I get from those people who know what they're talking about is uniformly positive and appreciative.
Director Wray, I know you have been asked this many times, but I do want to ask it of you because the president has issued repeated attacks on the FBI, on the integrity of its work, on the people who work here at the FBI. In fact, he said that the reputation of the FBI is in tatters. Those attacks have to have taken their toll.
I'll tell you what I see. I see 37,000 men and women who get up every day trying to keep 325 million American people safe. I see people who work their tails off in that effort, who are people of character, of courage, of professionalism and diligence. And we do thousands and thousands of investigations every year. I think about the agents that I swear in at Quantico several times a year who compete like heck to be accepted into the ranks of the FBI. I think about the Chicago agent, the SWAT agent that I thought about the other day who got shot at point blank range by an AK-47, lost the use of his dominant hand, retrained himself to shoot with his other hand, requalified for SWAT, and then not only set about going back to work on the mission, but to being a good mentor to an ATF colleague who'd also been shot. I think about the woman in Miami I met who had 12 stitches in her face, injured, back at it the next day. I think about the guy in Portland that I met just recently, one of our bomb techs, who got peppered with shrapnel from a booby trap that he encountered when clearing a house, back at work the next day. I could give you example after example. That's the FBI that I see. That's the real FBI, and that's what we're about.
I mean, you're the leader of an incredible organization, the FBI. And all of us are members of different organizations, and when sometimes someone insults our organization, we tell them to cut it out. Have you told the president to cut it out?
I'm not going to comment on my discussions with the president. I will say we're big boys and girls. We're used to criticism. There's a lot of opinions out there by a lot of people in a lot of settings. We're focused on the work and the people we do the work for.
You've addressed this issue, but the scathing IG report that followed the last election, specifically into Hillary Clinton's emails, did that hurt the FBI's credibility?
Well, I think the Inspector General's report speaks for itself in many ways, and it's 500-something pages long. I would say that
It was nitpicked by both sides.
Well, we're an organization that's 110 years old, and we're an organization of 37,000 people. And I would say that just like any organization, we've made our share of mistakes over the years. What defines us ultimately is whether we learn lessons from those mistakes, and we have done that over and over again, including in this instance, and come out better and stronger from it, and that's what's going to happen here.
Let me ask you about the Catholic Church. that has been in the news as of late. And there are now attorney generals in several states that have launched investigations into the Catholic Church and abuse by priests. At what point does this rise to the level of a national investigation where the FBI would get involved?
I'm not going to be discussing whether we're going to be conducting a particular investigation or not. I would tell you that in my view, there is no set of victims in this country that are more worthy and more in need of our protection than our kids. And I think it's a point of pride for everybody who works in the FBI that we fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And I will also say that when we have the facts and we have the law and we have the evidence to support an investigation, there is no institution that we're afraid to investigate, period. Now, we've done lots and lots of work to keep kids in this country safe from lots of different kinds of predators. Just in the course of this year alone, we've rescued something like 1,350, almost 1,400 kids.
Rescued them how?
So these would be kids who have been kidnapped or abducted or exploited in some way. It's something we take very personally at the FBI.
Yeah, the FBI is on the front lines of taking care of children, rescuing them, amongst all the other things that they do.
Right, and we view our job as both to get the bad guy and to get the child back.
Mm-hmm. The issue of attacks on journalists. The president has frequently called the press the enemy of the American people. The FBI just recently foiled a plot against the Boston Globe, where the man had threatened to essentially shoot up the newsroom, and he used the phrase enemy of the people. Is the FBI investigating threats to journalists?
We do have a number of investigations involving threats to journalists. Just in the course of this year, I would say we've got maybe a half dozen or so investigations of threats to journalists in particular. But that's not counting all the ones that we work on with our state and local law enforcement partners as well. Certainly, for example, we had the active shooter situation in Annapolis with the paper there. We worked closely with our state and local counterparts to try to be of assistance there. We have our evidence recovery teams, evidence response teams. We have our lab. We have our SWAT team. So we do a lot of things to deploy. But in my view, threats of violence, much less actual violence, to the news media is something that we cannot and will not tolerate in this country.
Let's turn to China and the efforts of China here in the United States. Would you say that China has been more successful than Russia in terms of infiltrating American intelligence?
Well, I do think that that there's no country that presents a more broad and more comprehensive threat to our ideas, to our innovation, to our economic security, in many ways to so much of our daily lives than China does. And that takes a lot of different forms, and it is the FBI's top counterintelligence priority, and it needs to be. So our men and women are grinding away on this issue day in, day out.
Your top counterintelligence priority is China. It's not Russia.
We spend a lot of time working on Russia too, but if I look at our counterintelligence mission overall, China is our top priority in that space. We've had cases involving everything from turbine technology in places like upstate New York to corn seed development in Iowa.
What do you mean corn seed? They're trying to steal our corn seed?
Well, of course, we have, I think America's agriculture is the envy of the world, and we're very proud of it, and we should be. And whenever we're the best at something, somebody else is chasing us. It's something that I think most Americans don't understand.
Well, what are they trying to steal? What do they want?
They're trying to steal our trade secrets, our ideas, our innovation, our assets, if you will, our ideas.
It sounds like we're under attack.
Well, I don't know that I would use that word, but I would say that we are in a situation where there is widespread intellectual property theft, economic espionage, cyber intrusions, and those are things that we are going to fight back against.
The U.S. Trade Representative put a figure on the theft of intellectual property, and it's up to $600 billion annually. It's enormous.
The thing that people need to understand is that this has an impact on everyday people. It has an impact on American businesses. It has an impact on American jobs. It has an impact on American consumers.
How so?
Well, China's goal is to take what it can and become essentially self-sufficient and put American businesses out of business.
Well, to replace America as the world's economic superpower.
I think that's their goal, and they're pretty open about it.
Mm-hmm.
I will stack our innovation, our system, our people up against any, but it's a threat that's real, and it's something that we need to take very seriously, and it involves not just the Chinese government, it involves Chinese businesses, both state-owned businesses as well as Chinese ostensibly private businesses that advance the Chinese government's agenda, or in some cases are even directed by the Chinese government. It involves not just traditional spies, you know, the old school spy versus spy kind of thing, but also other types of people who are sent here by China, either pressured or incentivized to steal information and bring it back to some arm of the Chinese government.
I mean, the FBI has indicted professors in the past. What threat did they pose? Chinese professors.
Well, I have to can't speak to any specific case, but certainly we have situations where we have research scientists who come from China, who work in very sensitive fields of study that are very relevant to our national security, that involve national defense information. There's a very close and appropriate partnership between the scientific community and our defense infrastructure in this country. And in some situations, there are academics who take that information and bring it back to the Chinese government.
But I think, as you were just saying, they're not traditional Chinese spies. They're in academia, they're in all kinds of different fields that are carrying out this type of economic espionage.
That's right. These are people who are, in some cases, research scientists, in some cases, business people, in some cases, other kinds of researchers.
Students.
Some cases, they could be students, more likely graduate students than undergraduate students, but in some cases, they could be students. Again, not for a minute do I want to suggest that all Chinese visitors are somehow up to no good. Not at all. But there are lots of them, and we have lots of investigations ongoing, as we just discussed.
How many arrests has the FBI made of Chinese spies?
I don't have that number handy.
Bill Evanino, who's the country's top counterintelligence official, he told CBS News that China was dedicating ungodly resources to espionage and that it was more aggressive than ever. He said that the FBI had arrested more than 24 Chinese spies.
Well, depending on the time period, I'm quite confident that would be an accurate number. It just depends on what time period. We certainly, I think we probably arrested a lot more than that, depending on how far back in time you go.
Since 2016, 5 current or former employees, some of whom worked here at the FBI, have been charged with espionage. So what is the FBI doing to make sure you don't have spies here?
Well, what you're describing there is what we call the insider threat, and that's something that we and the rest of our partners in the intelligence community are very focused on, which is situations where somebody already working in the intelligence community is recruited or co-opted by a foreign intelligence service, in this case the Chinese. And one of our core missions, going back 110 years, is to protect America from that threat. And we investigate it very, very aggressively and carefully, and we intend to continue doing that.
Given the scope of that Chinese espionage and efforts to steal our American technology, that's could be up to $600 billion annually, what's the FBI doing to counteract that? How do you do it? How do you prevent the stealing of wind turbine technology, corn seed technology, everything that's out there that they're trying to steal?
Well, it starts with vigilance. And so even though we are devoting lots of resources, lots of agents, analysts, and professional staff to lots of investigations in this space, in order to be able to get the kind of coverage that we're talking about here, we need to make sure that we're partnering more and more closely with American business, with the private sector, with American universities. And we're doing a lot these days all over the country to meet with and engage and brief those institutions, whether they're companies or research institutions, and to try to encourage them what to be on the lookout for. And in many cases, they can take steps to protect themselves, which helps us all in this common fight. It is, in many ways, a kind of a whole of American society defense here.
And just to drill down on this to give our viewers just kind of a sense of what's going on, this was public that in August, a General Electric engineer was arrested for stealing plans for power turbines. How did the FBI find out about that?
Well, I want to be a little bit careful what I say about a specific investigation, other than to say that we partner very closely with American businesses, and a company like that is a classic example of a situation where they have certain expertise, access, infrastructure, we have certain expertise, agents, and might, and working together, we can come up with a solution.
So more broadly speaking, since you've been FBI director, are some of the great American companies coming to you and saying, we think the Chinese are trying to steal some of our best technology?
One of the things that's been most gratifying to me in my first year on the job is how committed and enthusiastic a lot of American businesses are to working with us in this common fight. And we have found situations where they've come to us now that they know better what to be on the lookout for, and we encourage them to do that. It's the whole see something, say something in a very different context, and we usually use that expression. And then we often will ourselves reach out and tell them something we're seeing, and sometimes that then prompts a very productive conversation.
It's not only these individuals who are engaged in spying, it's companies. You've raised concerns about the Chinese telecom giants, Huawei and ZTE. Why are they national security risks?
Well, anytime you start talking about foreign companies that are beholden to foreign governments that don't share our values and our dedication to the rule of law, it enables them to conduct economic espionage. It enables them to conduct different kinds of cyber attacks. It enables them to steal information in a variety of ways.
The president intervened a few months ago to save ZTE from some of these crippling financial penalties that Congress wanted. Was the president wrong?
I continue to be very concerned, and I think the intelligence community continues to be very concerned about the threat to our telecommunications infrastructure presented by some of the kinds of companies that are beholden to foreign governments that don't share our values. And the idea of letting the fox in the hen house is something that I think people need to be really, really careful about before we find out that we're going to regret it.
Let me talk about your tenure as FBI director. You've been in office just over a year now. Has it been a tough year? How would you describe it?
You know, it's had its challenges, of course, but I knew that coming in. I think that this is an organization that has some of the greatest people in the world and has one of the most important missions in the world. And I think it's a privilege to be able to work with these people. And as I make my way around the country, I've been to 43 of our 56 field offices and met with them. I've met with every headquarters division. I've met with a whole bunch of our offices overseas. Over and over and over again, I meet unbelievably inspiring, hardworking, dedicated people who come from all walks of life, who are unified by one thing, which is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And I feel very lucky to be a part of it, much less as the director.
Your predecessor was fired. James Comey was fired by the President of the United States. Did you want this job?
I was not seeking this job. I was in private practice. I thought my law enforcement days were behind me, and I was doing quite well in private practice. But when the opportunity arose and I started talking with some of my friends from the FBI who had been agents that I worked with when I was a line prosecutor in Atlanta, who were agents who worked at headquarters when I was here on and after 9/11, the thought of coming back into this space was exciting to me, and I believe so strongly in their mission and in their character that the opportunity to do it was something that I didn't think I could pass up.
You've been called a steady hand, described as understated, and that you give everybody their day in court. What is it that you want the American people to know about you that they may not know?
My mantra, my motto that I've expressed over and over again to our folks is keep calm and tackle hard. And that basically boils down to there's no amount of yelling or screaming or anything else that's going to get the FBI off track as long as I have anything to say about it. We're going to focus on the work, on the mission, which is protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. Everything else is noise.
So in the midst of a lot of partisan bickering and back and forth, you're what? Focused on the mission, it sounds like.
I think what the American people should expect, deserve from the FBI and from the FBI director is straight shooter, and that's what they're going to get.
Thank you.
Thank you.